No, I'm not Greek, but yes. Thank you for your interesting talk, Professor.
It looks bad. Now, pull out the knife. Because when you begin like this, sorry, please.
So I'm a student at Birkbeck, and also got a background in sciences and physical sciences.
The real sciences, not
yes,
nothing
the
like
real
us. Yeah, yeah.
So,
neurosciences, sorry.
Physics.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So my question is this: what is the materialist theory of subjectivity? Now, this materialist theory of subjectivity has to connect the domain of physics on one hand with the subject, since science is the study of the material universe.
Yeah.
So as such, since physics is the study of material objects, the theory of the subject must conform to this criterion.
Yeah.
If we are to have a subject who knows.
Yeah. But why do you connect? For me, subject is one thing, subject who knows is another thing. I don't think that knowledge is something that we really spontaneously want. But okay, another point. Go on, please. So, I'm sorry. Please.
So the subject is part of the material universe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the only possibility for this to occur is that somehow human subjectivity must be mediated in some way by technology. And
why technology?
Well,
when humans emerged out of apes, there was no technology.
Well, subjectivity. We have the subject as part of the material universe. It's not outside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need a theory of the subject that is material.
Material in what sense? So that it explained how subjectivity emerges out of material world and as part of that world. Is this that you mean, or something more?
Something more probably, but it's the subject is actually material. So the only way that this can occur for me, if you want to agree, is that the subject itself. So there's many discussions about. So is the subject of the machine. Okay.
That's interesting. Why? Can you explain this? Because this presupposes that a living organism, and I'm not saying that my answer is no, just it's not self-evident, that a living being can be reduced to a machine also.
Well, it's the subject, in the sense of the Lacanian subject.
Yes.
So if you start with Lacan and you also use a bit of Hegel. There's a passage in book 2 of Lacan's seminars where he starts to describe what he asks the question directly. So what one asks is the nature of the subject.
Yeah.
And he asks this question. He talks about some sort of, he relates it to some sort of ex machina, some sort of deus ex machina. He uses that phrase. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So and now we're in an era of artificial intelligence, for example. So we're considering machine subjectivity as well. So that's what kind of led me to making this conclusion that the subject itself is the subject of the machine. So,
in a way, I agree with you. But sorry, finish your question.
Yes,
or did you? Okay. It's a wonder. Sorry.
Yeah. So ultimately, this leads to this conception of a universal subject. So the principle of the universal subject comes about as a result of this interplay between the subject itself, subject to the machine, mediated human subjectivity, and this kind of master-slave dialectic via Hegel to arrive at the universal subject. And
what do you mean by universal subject? I don't get it.
The universal subject is like the kind of endpoint of this master-slave dialectic between man and machine to arrive at some sort of ultimate point.
Sorry. I got it. Yeah.
So thanks again.
Oh, thank you. But I will try to be as. It's really sad that we don't have, because admitted this is a question. A modest answer would be between 3 and 4 hours. But I will try to say this. I would put it like this. For some people, maybe it would have been even too idealist. I claim that something happens with human subjectivity, symbolic universe, and so on. And for me, the first materialist question is, how should nature be structured, material nature, so that something like human subjectivity is possible? Because I think that no amount of dialectical deduction and so on, no amount of evolutionary gradualism will enable you to begin with stupid, totally inert mechanic material objects, and then somehow through complex integration to come to animality, to come to human life, because things get complex already with animality. I love reading modern biologists, like the one who is the grand old lady, I think she died, Lynn Margulis and others, who point out, and even some intelligent Darwinians have this idea that living being presupposes a certain temporal circularity. Living being means that something that is the effect of a process retroactively takes over the process itself. For example, I was so deeply fascinated by Lynn Margulis. She is famous for her cell theory. She claims, forget about animals and plants, the basic magic of life is a cell. How nature self-organizes itself in such a way that a certain entity posits a limit between inside and outside. The big problem of self-organization is the skin, the limit. So that you say this is in, this is out. And the idea is that, okay, I will not go into it. To cut a long story short, my point is that, maybe I'm too naive, speculative here, that you have to go to quantum physics. That's maybe...
that is the kind of the course, but sorry, I have to interrupt there as a
yes.
bit background in physics. In quantum physics, it's still a materialistic theory. It describes particles in terms of probability, that's correct.
Oh, but not only this.
The subject-object relation, there is always the observer and the observed. So the subject-object relation is always conserved. In every quantum physics experiment, it is always...
No, wait a minute, now I'm not totally bluffing here. I spoke with many of them. It's true what you are saying, but nonetheless, I claim, and even you find this even with Niels Bohr, the true problem of quantum physics for me is that this probability is not just a cognitive probability, that it's an ontological probability. And point two, this, I developed this point widely in my books, this ontological probability means that nature in itself is not fully determined. It's not that things fully exist out there, we observers just cannot fully get to know them. The beauty of quantum physics for me is almost the opposite. What pre-exists the subject is some relatively indeterminate oscillation, and it's only through the observer that this indeterminate oscillation collapses into determinate thing, and so on and so on. So in other words, I am not an idealist, and I'm not talking here about, okay, I'll put it in another way. The big problem, I know that, how do you call, my God, this theory of not self-collapse. What's the term of this theory now, which tries to develop in an immanent way without external observer, how a wave oscillation can collapse? You must know it if you are not total idiots. I am now. No. Sorry?
Entropy?
No, the opposite. How you can get a collapse, but without an observer. Without an observer. I totally agree with you, because I think it's absolutely crucial to emphasize that quantum physics is not a subjectivist theory. It's not, some kind of observing ghost creates reality and so on and so on. It's not that. But nonetheless, it's also not naive. What fascinates me is this. What type of reality is described there? First, it's a reality in which, if I may put it in this way, possibility as virtual reality has a positive ontological status of its own. In our ordinary material reality, different things can happen. But when one thing happens, others fuck off, are disappeared. Not in quantum physics. In quantum physics, now I'm talking in very abstract ontological terms. If you want to understand what a thing is, you have to include what it might have been but didn't, and so on. In a way, variations possibility has a certain, okay, I don't want to get lost in this now. That would be my first answer. So now we come to the second point here. When you say materialism, yes, but what notion of matter? I think we should abandon this naive notion of matter, like, small particles which run around in the void and so on and so on. The big lesson of quantum physics for me is that, how should I put it, but we all know this, that's the ABC, that zero, even that comes the title of my book, less than nothing, and so on. All this is not just our epistemological imperfection, but part of matter, part of reality. Matter is not just some little tiny particles running around there in some space, and so on and so on. That matter, I'm not talking now, I'm not a physicist, about antimatter and so on and so on. But for example, what absolutely fascinated me, like intellectual, unfortunately, orgasm permanent, is this idea that I very clumsily probably resume in my big fat book of two vacuums. That is to say, the basic ontological paradox that if you imagine by vacuum a total emptiness, zero level, that you already have to spend some energy to get at this. That is, it's not as we think, nothing costs nothing, and then you have to add something. So I claim that without this type of ontological foundation, you cannot explain subjectivity. It's a big speculation, we may disagree. But where I agree with you, and I read now a wonderful book, I forgot the guy's name, it's one of these expensive books that academic publishers, I hate them, publish, where it's like soft cover, 300 pages, and it's 70 pounds, those. But it's on mechanism in early Hegel. And it demonstrates that Hegel became, in your sense, Hegel became Hegel when he abandoned this stupid romantic notion of lower level alienation mechanism and then higher level organicism and so on and so on. You know what Hegel already says in your sense? That we have this lively organic interaction, but how do we pass to subjectivity in the sense of symbolic human being? Only so that this lively organic process is brutally submitted to a mechanism. Language for Hegel is at its most elementary precisely not a living organic entity but a mechanism. And Hegel was always fascinated by this. For example, in an ingenious insight, he says, how wise was history so that as the universal language of Europe, it was Latin, not Greek, which was selected. Because precisely Greek, ancient Greek, was perceived as more organic, all this Heideggerian mythology, while Latin was perceived as mechanic, drill, and so on. Hegel was always aware that the background of our free thinking is always an empty, blind mechanism. We have to rehabilitate mechanism, symbolic mechanism. This is, of course, the sense in which Lacan uses it, but precisely in its alienating force. It's not a mechanism which is organic part of ourselves, whatever. It's precisely something extremely disruptive. Language is, for Lacan, a kind of a stupid, I underline stupid, mechanical apparatus which takes over a living organism and so on and so on. So I know I didn't answer to you in a satisfactory way, but just to reassure you, I am following very closely all this, sorry, I'm so stupid. The process is called decoherence, no? This process. And there are attempts, but it's tricky. They don't work. The interest of decoherence theory is to formulate, the big hope, you must know better than me, decades ago was string theory. I may be wrong, but the way I get the simplified version from my spies in science departments is that string theory is now gradually losing ground. There are problems with experimental verification. It's not only that they cannot do it, it's that they even cannot imagine a way how to do it. It's just a different reading, and it's you pay too much of you get rid of certain paradoxes, but then you have to introduce, it's like how the guy called a little bit too much of a new age quantum physicist, David Bohm, Okay, he did solve some paradoxes, but you have to buy a lot more of other paradoxes for it. So I am being told, maybe I'm wrong, I would be grateful if some of you know it better, that decoherence is now the central effort. It's precisely it also sounds wonderfully Hegelian, because in one of the versions, I cannot go now into detailed line, but as they put it is that when it reaches a certain quantity, a process starts to observe itself. Because it's, that you don't need an external observer. Its own complexity registers what its parts are doing. Now, I'm not sure this works. I admit totally openly that I am here, more or less this kind of, I'm much worse than, it was a wonderful surprise and a big victory of the left. I was so glad. Did you read it, how Justin Trudeau, the relatively progressive, some stupid journalist thought that he will catch him and ask him, but what is this, how do they call it, my God, this, not just bit, sorry?
Quantum computers, no?
Quantum computers. Because, and they idiots thought they would catch him. Sorry?
It wasn't like that apparently. Apparently he asked the journalists in advance, he said to them, I hope so.
So he was bluffing, total bluff.
Yeah.
Even better for him, that's how the left will win. Yeah, okay. No, when I inform somebody, you will never catch me, like it's... he was a Hegelian, like asking himself and so on. Really, but this is very sad, so it was all staged.
Yeah, and he was rehearsing the answer all morning, and then it became viral. And everyone
oh my God! Now, why did you? I will kill you. You now ruined my. But, on the other hand, I must say, I thought that it was too nice to be true, almost. But oh my God, I hate you. Fuck off! No, put a door. I will not say. I don't want to appear to be a racist, but just persons who are from Greece, whose family name begins with M, and family name with A, and Christian name with M, let's leave it totally neutral, are not permitted to enter this room.
I'll get my coat.
Yeah. Sorry, so maybe let's try another one before I have to disappear.
I'm not Greek, I'm Iranian, just to...
Are you Iranian? Maybe what I would like, okay, let's not lose time, but I would like to visit the country because I was shocked how much more intellectual life you have than many other Arab countries, no? You translate a lot and so on.
Not Arab.
Sorry?
Not Arab. Iran's not.
I know, sorry, I always make this mistake, but I know, this is your big point of, you are here a little bit like us Slovenes, when they say Slovenia is the most developed part of Balkan, and every proud Slovene will tell you, no, we are Middle Europa, we are not Balkan. But okay, the racist answer is because of this, because you are not Arabs. But isn't it true that your intellectual life is much more?
Yes.
Modest answer, yes. Okay, let's do one more quickly. There was a lady here. You.
Hi. It's not really a question. It's just if you could comment in what's happening.
So it's just you are a dirty neo-fascist or what? Without. Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Just if you could comment on what is happening in Brazil.
No, I don't know enough. I don't know enough, but I think it's a general I've spoken about this corruption with Negri, 5 years ago, who just returned from a visit to Brazil, and Negri is a friend of Lula, no? And his justification maybe was that because of the complexity of electoral system, they need to enforce their measures. They need the collaboration of smaller parties. The only way to get things done was to corrupt a little bit the smaller parties. But now it looks it went way beyond that. If you ask me, but I don't know, my spontaneous reaction is maybe all is true. That is to say, there was corruption in Labour Party, but at the same time there also is a plot and so on and so on. You know, I tend to be a pessimist, if you ask me. But it made me very sad because I could not predict. I saw for a long time the Argentinian crisis coming, the Venezuela crisis coming. But I must say I didn't expect it such a strong crisis in Brazil, and I would demoralize it in the sense that but in the sense that the true problem is not just, corruption or whatever. It's that obviously there is a certain limit to the Lula model of government, It worked very well for some time. Even my radical leftist friends were telling me, whatever your criticism of Lula, but he did lower the level of poverty, build infrastructure, all that, and so on. But they claimed it's not just a contingent deviation, this explosion now, So I'm very sad but I was pessimist from the beginning.
What I asked because some psychoanalysts, they are claiming the interesting thing that what needs to happen is a psychoanalysis of the whole nation.
Oh my God.
Mainly because, but what you said that that needs to be the figure of the analyst.
Yeah, but how do they imagine?
Mainly because, for example, on Sunday the Congress votes starting of the
yeah.
And despite the fact that at least 50% of them dedicated their votes to God and to their own families, to the Brazilian family, apart from that horrible part of it, there was a wall built in front of the Congress separating people dressed in red and people dressed in the flag.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people on the streets with very different politics. The elite basically that is neoliberal, and then the rest. But the solutions that have been presented so far, at least to my understanding, are exactly what he said. The biggest left parties they're still really minority, but they're saying that what the Labour Party and government missed out on is the touch with the social movements. So they are proposing that there is more presence of the social movements in the government as a way of change. But then you're saying
I don't believe. I must say no. I don't, because again, when you have the government functioning in this way, it was exactly the same thing. If there is some Argentinian here, he can lynch me or she afterwards. But I know in Argentina how this touch with social movements developed into clientelism and so on. This is maybe my paradoxical formula would have been that what we maybe need is on the opposite, a more alienated government. Alienated, of course, not in the classical Marxist sense, but in the sense that really at a distance, not too much involved with social business and so on and so on. Where, like in Slovenia, my country, I like this paradox. Although I was very much against communist regime. But now retroactively we can say that the best government we had was in the last years under communism. You know why? Because it was, of course, formally government without democratic legitimization. But the disintegration of communism was at the horizon, so now comes the beautiful irony. Because of this, and because they knew their rule is not properly legitimized, they felt guilty all the time and they tried to do the best. Because they felt this pressure. The moment we got democratically elected government, they said, now we're empowered democratically, fuck off, vote for us, but now we can do whatever we want. And it went much. So I would like to invent something like this, a government which is not fully democratically legitimized, but because of this feels guilty all the time and is totally terrorized, you know. I mean, because again, let's be open here, but it really, but you know what interests me? It's not just corruption, but what was wrong, what was the limitation of the model itself? Because I like Brazil, why? Because from what I learned, maybe I'm wrong, in Venezuela, the sad thing is not just the crisis of Chavismo. The sad thing is that did they really, with all those social, local communities, whatever, self-organization, but did they really invent anything new? I doubt it. I know they made experiments all the time. I think I already told this story here. It's my favorite because I'm a pessimist. You know, Chavez was often giving, the government was giving factories to workers, workers take it over to organize it. I have a leftist friend there who was extremely evil, in a good sense, and just when it was reported on TV that factory is given to workers, he put it down, and then a year later, he went to check it up, what happened to that factory. Not even one was a success. Either they were simply bankrupted, reprivatized, government directly took over. I mean, what I'm saying is that this is a terrific dilemma. Fred Jameson's formula is the only thing that the left can do today is to insist on social democratic demands, you know, like in United States, universal health care and so on, free education, with the secret account that no government will be able to fulfill, to meet them, so that in the long term people will learn that we need more radical measures. But isn't this an extremely depressive, sad option? That all we can do is just to provoke the opponent by demands that we know that our only hope is that what we demand will not be met, that it will fail. That's all the crisis of today's left, and something will happen. I don't know what, but I really think we really do not have the formula. And what makes the situation even worse is that, and that's why I'm still a communist, that we cannot simply say, okay, so let's be realists and accept the existing order and play a kind of a third way, you know. We play the capitalist game, but a little bit more healthcare, a little bit more. No, that will also not work. Crisis is approaching, who knows what will happen and so on. So I'm sorry, I don't know more, but if you are from Brazil, I can tell you something else. This may strain. I hate up there, Bahia, Salvador. They are lazy, they dance too much and so on. I like dirty cities down Sao Paulo and so on. They are dynamic, they are dirty. You know, I had dirty joke, I will conclude. A wonderful, I became the best person. You know, in Europe, when I was young, there was a myth that in Bahia, are you from Bahia? No, good. You have black guys with gigantic penises. So I met one there, a psychoanalyst, and tasteless as I am, I asked him, you know, like, is it true you have it? You know what he told me? It was a very sad story. He told me it's true, but we pay the price for it. Because it's so big that many of us are impotent, because when we get erection, so much blood goes in there that we almost collapse and so on. And my reaction was so stupid, European racist, I started to jump, haha, revenge of the white man. But he was a wonderful guy. The result was that I became good personal friend with that guy. He gave me all the sympathy and so on, and whatever I gave him. It was a real example of how a touch of obscenity creates true friendship. No, but really, I don't like the atmosphere up there. I like this dirty, dynamic Brazil, you know. Not that Brazil of already Rio is for me suspicious. They dance too much there. Yeah. We need hard work, not dancing. Yeah. Sorry, I have to stop now. Thanks very much. And I will not forget the central line of thought